Well, good morning. I'm going to start out by asking you all a question. And this may seem like a really, really strange question for a minister to be asking. Why do you come to service on Sundays or tune in to the live stream? Is it for the community? To be around like-minded spiritual people? Is it to be uplifted? To feel good when you leave here? Or is it for the fantastic music that we get to enjoy every single Sunday? Or maybe it's for the minister's messages themselves. All of those are fantastic, great reasons to be here on Sunday morning. But, and this is a really big one, whether you're conscious of it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, I think that the real reason that you come to service is because it helps you in your soul evolution. In Unity, we teach that the Bible is the story of the evolution of our consciousness. So let's start with the Bible and see if we can find your soul evolution within it. And we'll start with Genesis 1, verses 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." And the verse goes on about people having dominion over everything on the earth and the earth itself. And then in verse 27, we read, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." This verse comes towards the very end of the first chapter of Genesis. And then in the second chapter, we get a different creation story. In the first creation story, it was actually, let me go back just a little bit. Some of you may not know that the Bible was actually written in a different order than how it actually appears. And so the first creation story was written hundreds or even thousands of years after the second one. And in the first creation story, the Hebrew name for God is Elohim. And in the second, it's Jehovah. The nature of these two creation stories are very, very different. And the nature of God is different within them as well. In the first, we get Elohim, God as universal creator. In the second is Jehovah, a very personal God, walking in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Now already, this suggests that the authors had a different understanding of God and at different times. In Unity, we interpret the first creation story to be an allegory for the creation of the spiritual universe, and the second story to be an allegory of the creation of the physical universe. I'm going to ask yourself to put yourself in the shoes of people who lived thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. You don't know very much about the physical universe at all. So does it make sense that you might focus first on the physical creation? That you attribute lightning and other natural phenomena to one or more gods because you just don't have an understanding? And then after hundreds or thousands of years later, you turn from the physical towards the spiritual. These two stories, to me, this is evidence of soul evolution. And here's another scripture that I think illustrates that evolution, and it's from 1 Kings 19, verses 11 and 12. And this is from the King James Version. And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. I interpret this passage as Elijah's understanding of God evolving. Now imagine yourself as Elijah. In your very limited understanding of the physical world, you experience this hurricane-force wind. And so you think that God is in the wind. But after time of reflection, you realize that's not the case. And then you experience the tremendous power of an earthquake, and so you think that God is in the earthquake. And then, after a period of reflection and time, you realize, no, that's not quite right either. Finally, you see this great fire, like a great big forest fire, and you think, well, God must be in the fire. And after more reflection and time, you discover, no, God's not in the fire either. You see, Elijah's understanding evolved until he understood God as the still, small voice in the King James Version. And the New Revised Standard Version, it's the sound of sheer silence. Evidence of your soul evolution can absolutely be found in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. First of all, you have to understand that these scriptures came to be over thousands of years. These stories were passed down orally long before they were ever written down. God, Jehovah, started out as a tribal God only for Israel. You may not know this, but the ancient Israelites, they could and they did believe in other gods. They just could not put any of them before Jehovah or worship them. And something that we're not taught in Sunday school, or at least I wasn't, those primitive ancient religions, they were brutal. These ancient people believed that God required animal sacrifice and the occasional human sacrifice. It was only later that became against God's will and law, and animal sacrifice could only be performed in the temple. And then we fast forward a little bit. We get to the prophets in about 899 to 800 BCE, that seeing God as this tribal God for only Israel shifted to an understanding of one God for all nations. That is evidence of our souls, this evolution of an understanding of God and our relationship to God. And then we get to the Gospels. And Jesus evolved mankind's understanding of God even further to a point where he explicitly prays in John 17, verses 20 through 26, that his disciples and his followers, we, us, understand that he, Jesus, is in God, that God is in him, so that we may all be completely one. This is the ultimate in your soul evolution, to know and to experience oneness. Oneness with each other, oneness with God, the divine, whatever you call the higher power. Another question for you. Where are you in your soul evolution? Where are you in your understanding of God and your relationship of God? Think back over your own journey. What was your concept of God like as a child? How did that change when you were in your teens and 20s? What is your understanding of God now? I'm willing to bet that as you reflected, you saw an evolution of your understanding. Reverend Paul Hasselbeck wrote in his book, Heart-Centered Metaphysics, different levels of the evolution of consciousness. The first one is victim consciousness. This is, life stinks and it is not my fault. Then there's victor consciousness. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, but at least I have some power over what's happening to me. Next, we get to vessel consciousness. In this level, there's still separation. Something is still happening to me, but in vessel consciousness, it is God that is happening to me. And so I first might believe in this level that I am an expression of the divine. And then I move towards an understanding that God, the divine, is in me. And then I might even get to a point where I'm able to believe that God is showing up as me. And then the final level of consciousness is what Reverend Hasselbeck refers to as verity consciousness. This is your soul's evolution when you have truly realized oneness. And we can find that in Exodus 3:15. I am that I am. At this level, there is no such thing as God and divine mind and me. This is Christ consciousness. This is realizing I am the Christ, I am divine. You are the Christ, you are the divine. Will you try these affirmations with me, repeating after me? I am the Christ, I am divine. Together, I am the Christ, I am divine. You are the Christ, you are divine. Together, you are the Christ, you are divine. This is the level of consciousness that Jesus came to be in. We tend to stay in one of these levels most of the time, but we do go up occasionally and we go down. For example, you might be feeling really great, knowing yourself as an expression of the divine. You're in traffic and someone cuts you off, and you're catapulted immediately down to victim consciousness. But you only stay there for a very short time. That's okay. That is the way that it works. Now, I need to emphasize that when we do go to those lower levels of consciousness from where we normally are, that we don't judge ourselves harshly. We must be gentle with ourselves. And likewise, and this is just as important, we cannot look at Jesus as the only one that is capable of attaining this level of consciousness that I'm talking about. In Scripture, he said, all the things that I have done, greater things you can do. And it's worth asking, do we really, truly believe that? Unity's first principle is that God is all there is. God is the one and only power, presence, and intelligence in the universe. And God is absolute good. Unity's second principle is that we are expressions of the divine in human form. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And that goes back to those two creation stories. In the first, the spiritual creation, we are created as spiritual man, spiritual woman. And in the second is where we take on physical form. Regardless, our essence is of God, and we are inherently good. This goes right back to that scripture in Genesis 1. We're made in the image likeness of God, of the divine. where I am in my own soul evolution, I'm now pretty comfortable believing and saying that I am an expression of the divine, that the divine is in me, and occasionally I can even say that I believe that God is showing up as me. I personally see and understand God, the divine, to underlie everything that's in the physical universe. And I also see God as more than that. I see God as infinite possibility, the infinite unseen. And now we get to that part in the lesson where you might be sitting there, and as Duke so fondly says, so what? Why? Why should I care about the evolution of my own consciousness? I'd like to read a quote from Marianne Williamson. Personal transformation can and does have global effects. As we go, so goes the world, for the world is us. The revolution that will save the world is ultimately a personal one. You see, in humanity's separation from God, seeing others as apart from God, apart from one another, believing in one's religion as superior over another's, humankind has plundered the earth's resources. We've treated one another horribly. We've waged wars, and we've committed terrorist acts, all in the name of God. We've condemned people to hell in the name of God. We have persecuted and executed people when they dare to express a different religious belief than the majority. This is still happening today. In the light of all the mass shootings that we've had, I think that is evidence that we are walking among the wounded, the spiritually wounded, who have become so incredibly disconnected from their true selves. And I say that with a capital T and a capital S. In this state of separation, mankind has projected its thoughts, its likeness onto God, not the other way around. I really believe that the survival of humanity, our planet, really depends on at least enough of us working towards this awareness, this consciousness of oneness, that it transforms the whole planet, the collective consciousness. That like the ripples, like when you throw a stone into a pond, it expands. I believe that enough of us do this. We can create a world of peace. That every person on the planet has safe shelter, food to eat, and clean water to drink. And on a personal level, when we work on our own soul evolution, we discover that heaven is within. We discover that heaven as peace, unconditional love, infinite ideas for personal and collective prosperity and well-being. You see, our understanding of God and our understanding of our relationship with God, it didn't stop with the words in the Bible. Each of us, consciously or not, is evolving in our understanding. And it's great when we do so consciously. We actively participate in that. So I briefly spoke about why that's important. So here are a couple of ideas that you can take with you in your everyday lives and work on your own soul evolution. First comes a desire and a willingness to do so. And, from that, you do show up here on Sundays. You read spiritual books. You attend a class or two or three. And we do that because the natural progression for most of us is to understand this concept of oneness intellectually first. We have to grapple with this intellectual understanding for a while, and then we begin to internalize it. We begin to feel it. We begin to experience it in our everyday lives. And we do this in a way that surpasses the intellect alone. Maybe where you are now in your own soul evolution is you know deep down in your heart that God is not some superhuman bearded man up in the sky, but maybe from your traditional religion, you're having a hard time letting go of that concept. Or maybe, just maybe, you have certain people in your lives that you don't like or you don't agree with on anything whatsoever. So one suggestion that I have is that you concentrate on all of the connections in your life and the miracle that those connections are. For example, consider what it takes, all the people involved in taking grain and making it be a loaf of bread on your table. The farmer, the granary employees, the train engineers, the truckers, the warehouse people, the bakers, the accountants, the software engineers, the stockers, and the clerks. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people to get the grain to the bread on your table. This web of interconnectedness, it is a miracle in my eyes and evidence of divine order. Contemplate these connections in your lives, and I promise you, in your own soul evolution, you will begin to get this idea of oneness. Another thing that you can try during prayer and meditation, contemplate the two words, I am. These two words, they are pure beingness. It is the eternal divine I am, the eternal divine that you are. Use it as an affirmation. Depending on where you are in your soul evolution and how comfortable you are, you might try on, I am the Christ, or I am God, expressing in, through, as me. And the reason that this works is because when we are really, really careful with what we put after I am, it propels us on our soul evolution, which is our evolution to our true self, our evolution towards oneness, Christ consciousness. Try repeating I am all by itself, and I promise, eventually you will grasp eternal being, eternal oneness in those two words alone. Be curious. Be willing to question your current ideas and concepts and understanding of God. Be willing why it's so necessary for you to do so. And be willing to devote time every day to your own soul evolution. Your prayer and meditation time are incredibly important tools in your soul evolution. So at this time, let us prepare for prayer and meditation.